Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Shekalim Daf test contains one Mishnah and also contains the first Mishnah of the next Perek of the Masechta, the fourth Perek, after ending the third Perek. From the beginning of the Daf until the Mishnah discusses the measurement of liquid to dry measures, how they compare and contrast both in regards to the halacha of the amount of wine you need for arba kosos and the amount of blood that is metame from a nevela. The Gemara then continues to discuss other precautions that were taken to make sure that people didn't steal the shekalim and the sources that you have to be clean of suspicion. The Mishnah then it takes us into a specific discussion of how the money of the boxes was used and withdrawn and how it was specifically laid out. And then the Perek, which we'll start, will discuss what happens with leftover money and all that. So the Gemara has been discussing the shear, the size of wine that's needed for a cup of wine or revius. The Gemara now says, what is the measure of revius in terms of volume of dry measures? So the Gemara says, its cubic measurement would be 2 fingers by 2.5 fingers by 1 5/6 of a finger. That is altogether 7 1/3 cubic fingers. Now the Gemara says, what happens if your wine dried out and it became congealed, it became thick and hardened? What is the equivalent size of wine? Now this halacha is relevant to carrying. The minimum size to be violating Issa D'Oraisa of carrying on Shabbos is a revius, as we have said on the daf yesterday. Gemara now wants to know how much of that wine that has been solid or hardened, how much of that wine qualifies as a revius. So the Gemara says it's a concise. A concise of wine, concise of a hardened wine is equal to a revius of liquid wine. The Gemara says this goes according with the opinion of Rabbi Nassan, who says that the actual size that you need to be violating the issue of carrying is a revius. There are other opinions that Rabbi Nassan was explaining Rabbi Shimon. There are other opinions of the Chachamim who say that it's not a revius, it's a quarter of a revius, because it's the amount of wine before the watering down that we consider, and therefore he wouldn't say a quarter, he wouldn't say a kazais, he would say a quarter of a kazais. The Gemara now discusses blood of a nevela. The halacha is that flesh of a nevela is mitame if it is at least a kazais in one piece. Other parts of a nevela are not mitame. Nevela again is an animal that died without shchita or a non-kosher animal that died. The question is, what about blood of a nevela? Is that matami or not? And if it's matami, does it have a minimum size of a revius? So the Gemara says an incident happened with the mule in the house of Rabbi Shimon Levi that died. He came and asked Rabbi Simon, what is the halacha here? And he said it's not matame, it's tahar. So Gemara says that Rabbi Lazar asked him, is that because it was too small a size, or is it because you're holding that blood of a nevela is never matame? So he didn't answer. So he went and asked Rabbi Shimon Levi, and Rabbi Shimon Levi said it's because it's too small. The blood of a nevela is matame. But this was not enough. It was not a revius in one spot. So the Gemara says that Rabbi Eliezer was upset that Rabbi Simon didn't answer him. Gemara has a very similar incident where Rav Bevai was sitting and he set up the following story where a mule also died in the house of Rabbi. The halacha there was given over that it's not metame. And Rav Bevai did not explain again if the reason that it wasn't matame is because it's too small a size or because he's holding that the blood of nevela is never matame. So Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Bisna asked, which one is it? So the Gemara says bat bei. That literally means he kicked him, but the understanding is that he was rude to him or he was dismissive to him. So Rabbi Zrika said, why were you dismissive to him? Is it because you don't like when people ask you things? That's why you didn't answer him? So he said, no, it's because I was very distracted, because I'm worried about where I'm going to have food to eat. And he quoted a pasuk in the Tochacha, the rebuke psukim of the Chumash. It says as follows: your life will be hanging in front of your face. You'll be in fear night and day. You will not trust your life. These are 3 phrases, says Rav Bevai, which describe food insecurity and different levels of food insecurity. Your life will be hanging before your eyes. That's somebody who doesn't have his own land, and he has to buy grain, he has to buy flour from others. So he doesn't know if he'll be able to buy or not. Now, worse than that is that's somebody who has to buy in small amounts because he doesn't have enough money to buy a lot at once, and therefore he always has to think about, am I going to have enough money to buy more grain? And the last one, you won't trust your life. That's somebody who doesn't even have money to buy grain at all. He has to buy bread ready-made. He doesn't have grain, or he doesn't have the wherewithal to make bread out of grain, and he always has to rely on the baker. A lot of things that could go wrong, and he wouldn't have anything to eat. So anyway, he says, I was very concerned about my food security, and therefore I didn't have mental energy to focus on answering his question, but I did not intend to hurt him at all. Okay, now the Gemara wants to know what is actually the halacha about the blood of a nevela. Is it matami or not? So the Gemara brings a brisa, which quotes Rabbi Yeshua ben Peseira, who says that dam nevela, blood of a nevela, is tahor. The Gemara says, so you clearly see that it's not dependent on size. It is tahor entirely. The Gemara says not necessarily. It can mean when he says it's tahor, it doesn't mean that it's not mitame, that it's not tameh. Tahor means that it's not machshir. The halacha is that for any fruits or vegetables to become tameh, it first has to become wet with one of the 7 liquids. One of those 7 liquids is blood, but not blood of a nevela. So what it's saying here is that nevela blood doesn't make things tameh, meaning it does not machshir, it doesn't make it prepared and able to ready to be makabel tumah afterwards. So the Gemara says, so what do you want to tell me? You want to tell me that the blood of a nevela is not machshir, but it is tameh itself. Oh, that can't be, because I have a Mishnah that says that there is nothing in tumah like the flesh, like one of the shratzim. The shratzim are 8 rodents that are matame when they die, like nevela. And the halacha of the sheretz is that its flesh is not machshir. Obviously, it's not a liquid, but it is matame. And therefore, when the Mishnah says that there's nothing like that, that means that there's nothing else that is matame, that is not matame, but it is machshir. So if you're telling me that the blood of a nevela is not machshir, then it's definitely not matame, because otherwise it will be the same as the sheretz. The Mishnah says, no, that's not a kasha. There are other things that are not machshir, but are matame. What it means when it says that there's nothing like a sheretz, it means that there's nothing that its flesh and its blood, the sizes for tumah, are the same. In a sheretz, they're both the size of a bean, a lentil. There's nothing else that has the same sizes. Nevela is different sizes for the flesh and for the blood. The blood is a revis, and the flesh is a kizayis. There isn't anything else that has the same size exactly. Okay, now, what actually is the halacha here? The Gemara is still working on it. The Gemara says that Rabbi Yossi says that it's a machlokes amiroi, it's a machlokes tanoim. Whether the blood of an nevela is really tamei or it's really tahar, it's a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yeshua ben Peseira. Now, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yeshua ben Peseira are tanoim. The machlokes amiroi is a machlokes tanoim, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yeshua ben Peseira. Now, Rabbi Yeshua ben Peseira we saw earlier. He is the one who the Gemara is saying now holds that blood is not tamei. Now, we had earlier pushed off that understanding, but Rabbi Yossi says no, that is the correct understanding. Rabbi Yeshua ben Peseira really holds blood is not tamei. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. Rabbi Yehuda says blood is tamei. The Gemara says that makes sense because Rabbi Yehuda the Tana was the paisuk in the house of Rebbe, and we had a story earlier where the mule died in the house of Rebbe, and the psak was that its blood would be tamei if it would have been enough of a size. So that fits with Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, who holds that blood of a nevela is tamei. Okay, the Gemara leaves this topic behind and refers back to the Mishnah where we had seen that there are a lot of precautions taken to make sure that the person who empties the box of Shekalim doesn't steal any of them. The Gemara adds a couple of other precautions. The Gemara says he couldn't have long hair lest he hide some pieces in his hair. The Gemara also says that when he came out of the chamber where the Shekalim boxes were kept, the Gizbarin, the administrators of the Beis HaMikdash, would comb through his clothing, the strands of wool in his clothing, to make sure that there was no coins hidden in there at all. Now, another thing he had to do is he had to be talking the whole time on his way in and on his way out, and make sure he didn't hide anything in his mouth. Gemara says, why didn't he just fill his mouth with water before he goes in? Gemara says, no, because he had to say a bracha while he was in there. Bracha, so he couldn't have water in his mouth, but he could talk the whole time, and that way you would know he wasn't hiding anything in his mouth. If he would, he'll work how funny. Okay, now the Gemara says, what is the source for the fact that you have to be above suspicion? Not only that Hashem should know that you didn't steal, but even that people should be clear you didn't steal. As Gemara says, is the pasuk in Torah, in Navi, and in Ksuvim. The one in Taivas and Bamidbar says, V'yisim Nikim Hashem Yisrael, you should be clean of Hashem, from Hashem, and from Yisrael, meaning there should be no suspicion. In Avi it says, a pasuk, Kekel Ikim Hashem. Then you skip a little, it says, Hu Yedea V'Yisrael Hu Yeda. He knows and Yisrael will know. You have to make sure that Hashem knows and Yisrael also know. Now, in Ksuvim, it's a pasuk that says, Matzachein V'Seichel Tov B'en Elikim V'Adam, you should find favor and good wisdom in the eyes of God and man. Now, the Gemara says, Rabbi Gamliel, that Gamliel Zuga asked Rabbi Yosi bar Rabbi Bun, which pasuk is clearest? And he said, V'yisim Nikim Yisrael. V'yisim Nikim Hashem Yisrael. The one in Nevi'im is actually referring to where the people on the other side of the Yarden, the Klal Yisrael, Reuven and Gad, and half of Shevet Menashe, put up a mizbeach, and people were suspicious. They thought it was an Avodah Zarah mizbeach. It's not actually what it was, and they were explaining that no, this is just to show that we're really part of Klal Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael. But they were suspicious there. That's not a great example of being above suspicion. We now begin the next Mishnah, last Mishnah in the Perek, which discusses how specifically the withdrawals of Shekalim from the collection boxes in the base of English were made. And the Gemara will give a couple of additional halachas and descriptions, and it will also teach us the famous brisa of Pinchas ben Yair about a person's ladder towards Ruach HaKodesh, Tchias HaMesim, and Eliyahu HaNavi. Okay, so the Gemara says what happened. The Gemara first discusses that the household of Rabban Gamliel would come with their shkalim in their fingers at the last moment, just before the withdrawal was made. They would actually follow the withdrawer in there. They have their fingers holding the shkalim coins, so everybody could see they weren't going to steal. They were going to add their shkalim coins in there, but they threw them in there right as he was about to withdraw to make sure that their shkalim went into the box that he was using to withdraw. The Gemara explains, why did they do that? What's the point in that? If you take from the box, then everybody whose shkalim were in the box are considered to have to be all connected, all involved, all having a share of the shkalim that are in the box that they withdrew into. Right? Just like if you separate truma from a big pile of fruits, all the fruits are fixed. When you take truma, when you take part of the coins out of the big box, everything in the box is fixed. It's all considered included. The Gemara says, yeah, you're right, they didn't have to, they just had a special nachas out of it. And that's what they wanted to know for sure, that their money, their shkalim, went directly into the box that was going to be used for the karbanos. Okay, the Mishnah, let's go back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah describes how it happened. So, like many things that Chazal instituted, the person who made the withdrawal asked, Etroim, should I withdraw? And they said to him, Troim, 3 times they said, withdraw, and then he made the withdrawal. Now, he had 3 boxes, and he filled up the first box from the first collection box, and it didn't all fit in there, obviously, only a third of it fit in. So the Gemara says, what do you do with it? So the Gemara says they would cover it with a leather cover, so that everything that's left in there afterwards is considered to be from the later withdrawals. It shouldn't be mixed in. Now, the way it worked was as follows. The money that was left in the box after the first withdrawal was considered shiraim, was considered leftovers. That was never going to be, machlokes, but that was never going to be used, according to the Chachamim at least, for the shkalim that are used to buy karbanos tzibur. That was going to be left as leftovers, and those leftovers would be used to fund other projects that the Beis HaMikdash had. Now, the second and third withdrawals that happened throughout the year, the one that happened 15 days before Shavuos, and the one 15 days before Sukkot, that was made from the coins which came in later and piled up on top of this leather cover. So again, when the first withdrawal was made in each of the 3 collection boxes, a leather cover was put down. Anything under the leather cover was going to be considered to be leftovers. That would be used for other funds. Then, after the Pesach withdrawal, again, from each of the 3 boxes, money kept coming in from all around Eretz Yisrael and from the surround. Well, the ones from Eretz Yisrael came in already by Pesach, but the ones from the surrounding towns around Eretz Yisrael, those came in from Pesach to Shavuos. And the second withdrawal was made from that. That was also covered over with a leather cover, and whatever was under the leather cover now also was considered to be extra leftovers that would be used for other funds. And then any additional money that came in, and the Mishnah describes it would come from all over the world. It would come from Bavel and from Media, from Madai, that would go on top of the leather, and the third withdrawal would be made from that money specifically. Okay, that's how the withdrawals worked. The Gemara discusses Rabban Gamliel, as we said. The Gemara now says that the first withdrawal had a cover placed on whatever was left over afterwards. Second withdrawal had a cover placed on what was left over from that afterwards. The third withdrawal didn't need a cover because there wasn't going to be any other withdrawals afterwards. So you didn't have to separate between what was considered to be leftovers, shirayim, was considered to be extra, and what was going to be set aside for the next withdrawal. There was no additional withdrawal. So Gemara says that the third withdrawal was actually the richest of them all. You would think, how much is left? It wasn't. It was the richest of them all because it came from all over the world. And people, in order to carry so far, would change their coins, their shkalim, for gold coins. The Gemara says they would switch it for estarios and darkonos of gold. Now, we haven't previously seen estarios. We've previously seen that they're allowed to change it for darkonos, but that's what this Gemara brings here. It's actually a brisa that the Gemara is bringing. Anyway, so therefore, what fit into the box was richer coins. You had coins that were the same size but more valuable. And therefore it was the richest and most valuable of all the three withdrawals. Now the Gemara again brings a brisa which describes that the first withdrawal was for the people from Eretz Yisrael. They're the ones who got their shkalim in there by the first withdrawal. Next withdrawal was for the cities that surrounded Eretz Yisrael. And the third one was for the distant cities of Bavel, Madai, and anything more distant than that all over the world. And of course for the rest of Klal Yisrael. Now, the Gemara says, how were the money in the three withdrawal boxes used? So we have three boxes that were containing the withdrawals. Those boxes were put in a special chamber in the Beis Hamikdash. Now you have three boxes. Now you got to take money from those boxes to actually buy karbanos, to actually buy animals. So the Gemara says, again, as you recall, they were marked Aleph, Beis, Gimel, or according to some, Alpha, Beta, Gamma. So they withdrew first from the first box. They did not finish the box. They did... Again, this is not withdrawal here. This is taking money from the withdrawal box to buy karbanos. So they first used money from the first box. Before that was finished, they went to the second box. And before the second box was finished, they went to the third box. The reason for that is that they may have never gotten to the third box if they didn't go on from the first box and second box before the money was used up. Now, the third box, they used all the money in the third box. When that was used up, they went back to whatever was left in the second box. When that was used up, they went back to whatever was left in the third box. They didn't finish it all. It went to shirayim, was considered to be extra money. Now, what if they did finish all of it and they needed to withdraw again? So here you have machlokes between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim where they withdrew from. According to Rabbi Meir, they went and they took from the shirayim. They took from the leftovers. It was supposed to go to a different fund, but it still has kedushas shkalim. It's still kachim, and they can go use that. And as a matter of fact, Rabbi Meir holds that if somebody would go steal that money, he would violate Me'ilah. Now, the Chachamim disagree with that. The Chachamim say you can't use that money. It doesn't have Kedushas Shkalim anymore. It's not considered to be Shirayim. You have to use new money that came in the meantime. So you would go back, before the next official withdrawal, you would go back to the big collection box and you would take some of that money that came in from the further places since your last withdrawal. Okay, that concludes the Gemara's discussion of how the money was spent. Now the Gemara here introduces the famous brisa of Rav Pinchas ben Yair, which the Sefer Mesilas Yesharim is built around. And the reason it's here is because we were discussing earlier making sure you're above suspicion. So this brisa begins with being above suspicion, and it teaches a chain of achievements that lead one to the next. And this is not quite the same brisa that we're familiar with from the Sefer Mesilas Yesharim. That brisa comes from the Bavli. This brisa, a slightly different order, and it has a couple of different steps, but the majority of it is the same. And the brisa says as follows. Rav Pinchas ben Yair says, Zerizus. It's the first rate he says. Zerizus is being zealous, doing things with alacrity and with energy, hustling, being quick. That brings a person to being clean of Avera. That's called Nikias. Being clean of Avera, being having. So the reason for that is clear. When you are doing things in an energetic fashion, you'll end up avoiding mistakes, end up avoiding Averas. You'll be clean of Averas. Now, somebody who's clean of Averas will achieve the higher level of Tahara, complete purity, even from things that are not Asr, they're just a little unseemly. Tahara brings a person to Kedusha. A higher level of sanctity than that that is where he's even achieving a stage of holiness. Kedusha brings a person to anava, being humble when he sees the level that he's on and he sees what the purity of Kedusha is, then he becomes humbled by his great responsibility and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Having that midah of anava brings a person to yiras chet, actual fear of sin. He doesn't want to do anything wrong. He is literally in fear of it because of his view of himself and Hashem. Therefore he is humbled, and therefore he has a fear of sin. Yiras chet, fear of sin, brings a person to chasidus. That's an extra high level of kedusha of lifnim mishur sadin, where he does things that are not only not unseemly, but he goes beyond responsibilities and he's on a higher level. When somebody does that, then he's really purified himself. He gets to the level of Ruach HaKodesh, of divine inspiration. Ruach HaKodesh, once a person has achieved that ability, he can do Tchias HaMesim, he can revive the dead. And Tchias HaMesim brings Eliyahu Hanavi, Zachur Latayf. Now, Reb Pinchas ben Yair explains psukim to show the links between each of these and how one leads to the other. So first of all, how do you see that Zrizus brings to Nikias? So it says V'chila mechaper. When you will finish, then it'll be mechaper, it'll clean off. Now that pasuk is talking about the avoda of the Kohen Gadol in the Beis HaMikdash on Yom Kippur, but it says those two words together, the V'chila, finishing off, gets to a person of kaper, of cleaning. Now, how do you know that Nikiyas brings to Tahara? It says, V'chipar la kohen v'tahera. The Kohen will v'chipar, he'll clean it off, and then v'tahera, you'll have purity. How do you know that Tahara brings Kedusha? It says, V'tiharoi v'kidushai. These are all psukim in the same avoda. He should purify it, and then he should sanctify it. How do you know that Kedusha brings to Anava? So the pasuk says, Kikoy amar ram v'nisa. This says the uplifted and exalted one, Sheikh Anad, living forever, v'kadosh shemai. Holy is his name, that's Kedusha. Marim v'kadosh eshkain v'ezdake v'shafo ruach. Even though he is high and holy and exalted, he's still with the humble. So you see, the Kedusha brings to humility. Now, how do you know that Anava brings to Yiras Chet? It says in the pasuk, Ekev Anava Yiras Hashem. From Anava comes fear of Hashem. How do you know that Yiras Chet brings to Chasidus? Because it says V'chesed Hashem me oilim v'ad oilam al yireyav. So that's V'chesed Hashem. Where does that come from? Where's Chesed from? From Yireyav, from having the Yiras Chet. That gets one to Chesed, to Chasidus. Now, how do you know that Chasidus brings Ruach HaKodesh? That's from the pasuk which says, "Az dibarta b'chazin lachasidecha." You spoke in a vision to your Chasidim. So you see, Chasidim gets one to Ruach HaKodesh. How do you know Ruach HaKodesh gets to Tchias HaMesim? That's the pasuk when Nasati Ruchi B'chem, I'll put my spirit within you, V'chayisem, and then you will become alive again. So that's again Ruach HaKodesh bringing Tchias HaMesim. Tchias HaMesim bringing Eliyahu Hanavi Zechor LaToiv, comes to Mehine Anech She'ech Lachem Es Eliyahu Hanavi, lifting Bayim Hashem HaGadol HaNeira, the Haftorah of Shabbos HaGadol, that I'm sending you Eliyahu Hanavi before the great day of Hashem. The great day is the Tchias HaMesim day. Just before that, you'll have Eliyahu Hanavi, which will come. Now the Gemara gives another way to achieve these high levels. Rabbi Meir says anybody who lives in Eretz Yisrael, speaks Lashon HaKodesh, speaks the holy tongue, he eats his fruits b'tahara, meaning he keeps the laws of Tumah and Atara on fruits, even though they're not kachim, and he says Kriya Shema completely every morning and every evening, he will be somebody who is Zocheh to Olam Haba. Okay, this concludes the third parak. Now we'll just see the Mishnah in the fourth parak of Shekalim. The Mishnah discusses what did they use the money for? What did they use Shekalim money for? So the Gemara says they used it to buy things for the tzibor, things for the public, karbanos specifically. So which one? So there was a karban tamid every morning and every afternoon. That was for the tzibor, that they used the Shekalim to buy those animals. Karban musaf of every Yom Tov was also a public one that was also used for those funds. They each came with nisachim, with wine and other things that were put on the mizbeach. Now there are other karbanos that were public, and that is the karban ha'omer, the barley, which is brought on the second day of Pesach to permit all the grain that just grew. The shtei alechem, 2 loaves of bread that were brought on Shavuos, and the lechem apanim that was brought every week. All these things are karbanos tzibur, and their materials were also purchased with the shekalim. So Gemara, the Mishnah here adds that on Shemitah they had a problem. Shemitah, nobody was allowed to plant barley, and nobody was allowed to own barley. So how did they have barley for the Karban HaOmer? Also for the Shtei HaLachem, how did they have grain for that? So they would have watchmen who would watch it and make sure that the animals didn't eat it, and then people didn't come to take it because it was hefker. Now, ordinarily you're not allowed to guard Shemitah fruits. It has to be left alone. But because they needed it for the Karban HaOmer, they put watchmen there. So those watchmen, their salary was paid from the Shekalim, because that was considered to be a need for a public carbon. Now the Mishnah brings a machlokes whether a person was allowed to volunteer to be the watchman without getting paid. Rabbi Yossi says they could. Could have a watchman there. He could say, I volunteer to do it without being paid. What's the problem? It's still considered to be that it's public property, and there's no issue. So the Chachamim disagree. They say, no, you have to hire somebody. And the reason is because if somebody's watching it himself, what if he decides to pick it up and take it for himself? Who's guarding from the guard? Maybe the guard himself will take it. So now if he's hired, you don't have to worry about that. Since he's working for you, even if he takes it, it'll belong to the public. It's not going to belong just to him. But Rabbi says, no, even if he takes it for himself, he can give it back to the public afterwards. It'll become public property. On that point, the Chachamim disagree. They say that if you take it for yourself, even if you're being hired, if you've been hired, it belongs to everybody. If, however, you take it for yourself and you haven't been hired, and then you decide you want to give it to the tzibur, that does not become public property and would not qualify as being used for the carbon.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.